Hello, welcome everyone to the fifth OneBeat podcast Collider. My name is Nyokabi Karaoke and I am a part of Found Sound Nation. We design and produce OneBeat in partnership with Bang on a Can and the US Department of State, which is a global music exchange program that brings artist leaders from around the world together in one space for collaborative creation and the incubation of projects that use music to make a positive impact in the world. So this episode, this podcast Collider rather, is based on the fifth episode of the OneBeat podcast, which features Ghanaian poet Poetra Asantewa, who is a force within the literary scene in Ghana. And Poetra is joined by some other change makers in the art scene in Ghana and in the African continent. And they're going to be touching on the role of art and institution and how that pertains to the future of the African continent. We'll be holding a short question and answer period at the end of the discussion where we'll get any questions from our YouTube and Facebook chat. So feel free to write any insights or questions or comments that you have for the panel. Please be respectful. And we'll also be sharing links to these artists at the end of the discussion, as well as links to the OneBeat podcast episode if you'd like to know more. So feel free. I'm going to hand it over to Akosia Hansen now, who is moderating the chat to introduce our panelists.
Hi everyone, my name is Akosia Hansen. I'm an artist activist, an artistic activist, and a radio presenter. Today we have giant contributors to the Ghanaian art landscape here with us: Ibrahim Mahama, Stefania Manfreda, and Poetra Asantewa. I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves. Their profiles are big, but I'd like them to introduce themselves. But first of all, let me say it's an honor to be sharing this stage with all three of you. It's such an honor. And I would like to start with Poetra. If you can please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do. Thank you. Okay, looks like we have some issues, so we'll try to get Poetra later. But Stefania, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess. So I'm Stefania Manfreda, and I'm Italian and Ghanaian. I was born here and raised here, schooled in uni in Italy.
Hi.
Came back and
Akosia,
worked for a
and
while in construction, but
everyone.
as a designer, I continued to give my contribution, I think, to the scene in Ghana. First off, by opening a concept store that was mostly centered around the idea of Ghana being given a fresh look and kind of a new life. So the Made in Ghana brand would have a little more value to it. And that was doing T-shirts. So I was just designing T-shirts, and that has somehow evolved into the home of urban culture, which we now call Local House, because we then experimented with anything and everything you could possibly experiment with, I guess, from workshops to exhibitions to pop-ups and collaborations of all sorts. So that's it in a nutshell. We opened a few other branches. One for the ladies called El Loco. Then there was the Container in collaboration with From Back, which was a pop-up gallery in a 20-footer container that was upcycled for the purpose. And yeah, since then we've been trying to scale up these efforts and provide more space for these kind of activities.
Thank you very, very much. And Ibrahim Mahama, you next, please.
Well, thank you. Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ibrahim Mahama, visual artist. I studied at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. My background I come from a very academic background. In art school, I went to Kumasi between 2006 and 2010. And at the time, the arts program was evolving, was starting to really evolve because a couple of years before, some new professors who had schooled in the same program had joined the faculty and were introducing like radical practice and thoughts and radical theory and things like that. So it really began to shift the way artists were producing. Back in the day, the older generation, so there was so much focus on artists making art, which was very traditional in the sense that they will be hanged either in hotel lobbies or things like that. Whereas within our generation, we're looking at the politics of the subject matter in itself. So it really influenced a lot of us in terms of how we're thinking. So one of the things that one of the questions that kept coming back was the idea of democratization of art, making art accessible, and also questioning the role of art within our society and what it can do. So I decided to build a simple studio in Tamale to make my work. And the studio evolved to become like an institution called SCCA Tamale, which we used in looking at practices like Kofidos and Ajimanosei, and then other projects that we're working on. And I decided to build another studio, which is red clay, and then it became more like a museum school to somehow look into like community projects and like introducing new pedagogical forms. Then just last year, I had a chance to buy one of these old Kwame Nkrumah silos because I've always thought that it's important for us to create new things, but it's also important for us to be able to get inspiration from older systems, create new things, and allow the new things to go back and save older things. So currently, that's just what we're doing. Yeah.
Very powerful and very philosophical. Thank
Oh,
you. All
Hassan.
right.
I was like, oh, I'm really listening to it. It's like he's explaining a lot. It's good.
Exactly, exactly. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how art and art making has shaped our past, present, and future on the African continent. And by introducing what you do, you've already started touching on the topic. My first question is, what did the arts landscape in your respective fields look like when you first ventured into it, and what does it look like now? I'd like to start with you, Stefania.
So for me, I missed out on a whole chunk of 10 years because I was studying in Italy. That was good for me. Also, I went through a whole different training process and different approaches to studying and experiencing art, obviously, because Italy is like the cradle of art and design. So I really took in a full experience in that time away. And I think that allowed me to appreciate it on the maximum level, I guess, because as a student, I used to go to all the exhibitions. There's design week, there's fashion week, there's all kinds of things happening. And we had like appointments where we'd go to every single show and every single gallery and to every little pop-up happening in town. Um, so coming back in 2007, with that experience or that package, I was now looking out for what was going on here, and I really didn't see much. You had your old, galleries that have been there since forever as institutions that kindly cater just to the very stereotypical, what we say, African art um, at the time. And I didn't see much of the younger, edgy stuff that I was used to experiencing in Italy. Because of that, I then started this like quest to find if there were any graphic designers or photographers or just creatives in general that were on the landscape here. And my avenue for that was first on Flickr because I was into photography myself. And so I was posting a lot on there. And it used to be very much like a community, how Instagram was in the beginning before the algorithms. It was a very organic space where people would share. And I started to just find the Ghanaian photographers on there. So people like Nana Kofi Aqua and Bobby Pixel, who's not with us anymore. A whole bunch of, the big guys today, which is back in the day where just like having fun and just doing photography are the people I linked up with on there. Then came Facebook. And again, being very curious, I wasn't seeing anything in town, so I was working a normal 9 to 5. I didn't have any places I could go where it would be artistically inclined. I mean, most of the enjoyment and the entertainment out here was going to a bar and getting drunk and food related, literally. So I was like, so what else? What else? What else? Alliance Francaise was literally the only place, and maybe Goethe Institute, that had some kind of cultural content that we could consume in that fashion. So I started looking on Facebook, just adding people I didn't know, but I'll just see their work if they posted it, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Let me just friend them. So at the end of the day, I started organically building this portfolio for no reason, really, other than just wanting to connect with people who are out there in Ghana. And I quickly realized that, there's actually some mad talent out there. It's just not put together in one place. It's very scattered. People are all over the place, and they don't even know how to bring all this out in a way that will then lead to maybe a job or lead to some kind of opportunities that would be, financially lucrative or whatever it is. It was just they're just there and they're trying and they're putting their stuff out there, so maybe someone will pick it up. And that's kind of the impression I got. But then I was really, really amazed at the level of talent I was seeing. And that really pushed me to like play my part, I guess, and be active in ensuring that we could experience these things in our own way. So it became a game. I had my regular 9 to 5, was in construction. I was doing the boring pushing of paperwork and up and down letter writing and da da da. And on the side, we had the shop that was just now starting as a t-shirt shop. And it took a little while, but people understood the brand and appreciated it. So you could tell that there was something happening, and it had a lot to do with the internet. So for me, that was when things really began to evolve, and the Ghana art scene started looking a lot younger. And I saw people were just like bolder in expressing what they wanted and what they felt and how they wanted to be seen. And they also were very aware of the fact that there's a global world now available at their fingertips, which wasn't available before. So that really shifted things. I mean, from the way things are even presented and the looks, and like I am just a clear example of that. I went abroad, came back, and said, okay, I want to make it Ghanaian, but I still want to give it this like international or foreign flavor. So it's like the globalization and modernization of things. You keep your elements in there. Maybe you turn them into some kind of symbols. So you can then, relate them to the rest of the world in a language that's more neutral and more international. So that was going on, literally. It was literally happening in front of our faces. And we were part of it. We were in it. We were like being involved in it. And we didn't realize. I mean, for me, it was just, hey, we were bored, we're doing stuff and having fun. And the kind of things that have come out of it since. I mean, I look back at some of my peers and people we worked with and collaborated with, they've gone really far. It's really nice to see. So there's been a big evolution, obviously, from then to now. We have so many more galleries. There's virtual stuff. There's physical stuff. There's a lot more now. There's way more now. Even the streets are available now in a way because there's graffiti and murals going around.
Thank you very much for the answer. You know what? Every time I talk to change makers, there's something they always say is that how did they get to do what they were doing is that they didn't see it around them in the first when they first came, and then they created that space. So it was powerful to hear you also share that same view. And we've actually got Poetry here. We're trying to have her here without video because of internet
Okay.
connection. So Poetry, how are you doing? Can you hear us? Hi, Poetry. Hi, Poetry. Okay. Okay. So as we still try to get Ibrahim, I'm gonna jump to you. What was the landscape like for you? Also, coming in, and what's changed? What was the landscape like?
Well, for some of us, like when I was in art school, of course, before going to art school, I was secondary school. I went to Pope John. We used to go to the art center to look at art exhibitions and things like that. So of course, I knew that I wanted to practice art. I had seen examples of art. For instance, if you go to the Novotel, they're constantly doing exhibitions, and also there's been a huge history of exhibitions around the country. So obviously, the older generation of artists have done a great deal of service in terms of art over the years. But for us, I guess the question was always the form, like in terms of the experience and the form that art took. So at least when we were students, the question was always how to expand what, like the form of art as it is now. So in our university, you have characters or people like Dr. Caricature Sedu, Castro, and many others, Dorothy, who are pushing students to somehow think of their independent artistic practices, even as students. So as a student, you'll be encouraged to, for instance, take, let's say, the city as your canvas to make your exhibition. Go to town, the market women, the way they arrange their things. There could be some kind of inspiration within it that could allow you to be able to think about art differently. Go to the cemetery, go to Trotro. Even one of our mates, Hartwell, her final year exhibition was literally she and her roommate, and then one other friend renting a Trotro in Kumasi and driving it around, like a female driver and a female mate. And it was very provocative, you know. Such a work would have never existed in the history and context of art in Ghana. So for us, it was more or less developing upon what was already there. So how we, like, even in the university, like, so for instance, Black Star Lines, which operates within the painting and sculpture department, which is a collective made up of students and professors alike. A lot of exhibitions, like they did a series of a trilogy exhibition at the Science and Technology Museum. The Gamas Go to Town, Cornfields in Accra, and Oddly Disorderly. There was also one which was done in Obuki in 2014, and a couple of other independent exhibitions both in Kumasi and around. And there was always a need to be able to create a dialogue or conversation between an older generation and a current generation. Of course, there isn't an arts market like in Ghana, for instance, much. So there's always been like galleries, the Loom and others who've always promoted artists, like Seth Day, who is a major collector who supported a lot of artists over time until 1957 came in and started working with artists on another platform, like internationally, and you have other galleries also coming up. But for us, there was always this need to go back to the fundamental question of art in the form that it takes. So for us, setting up the institution in Tamale, it was just a way of opening up that conversation, because a lot of these things that we're talking about, they are still down south. So if you talk about, let's say, Bolgatanga, Paga, if you're talking about rural areas, villages, and it's an idea that we are it's an idea and attitude that the fact that art is not just meant for people to see and say that, oh wow, this is beautiful, and we buy and put in our homes. Sometimes art is very ugly. It's something that someone sees and say, this is terrible, I don't want to see it again. So for us, the question, those were the fundamental questions that, at least within our generation, that was a shift, asking those fundamental questions with forms. So I'm currently have an exhibition in London, and a lot of the forms within it, in terms of like bats, which I've taken photographs of buildings in Ghana, or like using receipts from old factories from like the 50s, and there are things that ordinarily in the old, like if it was in the older generation, someone was, but this one you cannot use it for art, it doesn't fall within the context. School cabinets and sewing machines, you come in the gallery, you hear a lot of noise, like, but in Ghana, some like I deal with it, but it's interesting. That's for us, the point I wanted to make was that the shift in our generation is referring back to the idea of the glitch, because the world is in a constant state of crisis, but we always pretend that it's not. So when an artist wants to make a work, he takes the things that he wants to beautify the thing, even if it's a problem, he wants to beautify it. But for us, we want to present it as it is, and even in a more subtle, but when you look at it, there is something really haunting about it. So that was the shift that at least we've seen, at least within our generation now, in terms of artistic practice.
Oh, that's powerful. The world is in a constant state of crisis, and we're always trying to beautify it. And I guess artists are reflecting their times, telling the stories of the time. And thank you for introducing the conversation to us on art and form. Right, talking about form. What is institution? How would you define institution? And people will sometimes argue that institutionalizing art may kill the art. What are your thoughts on this? I'll start with you, Stefania. We're still trying to get Poetry, by the way, let me just say. You can go, Stefania. Thanks.
We hope she gets on. I mean, for institutions, I think it's, first of all, it's just creating order, if we're looking at it in the most basic terms. You can't have a whole of anything without it being able to be defined, without it having some parameters. I think it's just like placing some structures in place that would define what it is. first of all. And who does that? It depends on the body. I mean, it could be a government body, it could be a private body, it could be an organization, it could be a union, it could be all kinds of, it could have all kinds of formats. But it literally has to do with the definition and I think setting down the guidelines as to what it would be. So if we're talking about art institutions, we have to decide that. I mean, I don't think there's any body globally that's supposed to impose what it is per se. So for us as Ghanaians, what do we want to define our art as? And get to work on defining it, literally, because we as Africans, I feel, have a different interpretation of what art is as opposed to the West. In some regards, these things can come up. I mean, Asian art is also very different from, and then boxing them, putting them into all these like little categories is it can't be possible if you don't have your own definition of what you're doing. So I don't think it kills. I think the organizations might stifle, yes, when they become bureaucratic and they don't function properly. That's what kills. But the fact that you want to institutionalize something, and if the procedures are set in place and everything is actually running smoothly, actually helps. I think it's quite the contrary. I wouldn't exclude the fact that it also provides clear avenues for support, be it in funding or other forms of supports. So I mean, it's necessary because you catalog and put databases up on who is involved, who's part, who's not part, and allows people to even know where they can fit in this whole system. If it's not there, there's literally nothing to talk about. So for me, it's quite important actually. For us, in fact, the next step was even to do a registered institute or local house because we've been doing training in a very haphazard way again. It's just fun. But if we want to actually help people and give it some form of structure and like continuity, you definitely have to put it in a format that gives it that life. So yeah, most definitely it's important for me.
Okay, my follow-up question to that, Stefania, is what challenges have you faced giving structure and bringing order, creating institution
With
in your
creating,
field,
yeah.
your
Well,
challenges and also successes as well.
it's it's been a process, even arriving to the point of understanding, like we're saying, what we're doing. Because at the beginning, you just go, let's do. But then you have to stop and think, okay, when you look back, you realize how much has actually happened. And now what are we going to do with all of this? Because you realize there's people actually putting their eyes on you in a way that they have expectations of some kind. And you're like, what? When did that happen? But then you're like, okay, do I take the responsibility or do I just pretend I don't know about I don't know what they're talking about and just continue to have fun? So first of all, you have to do a reality check for yourself, and be like, okay, am I gonna jump into this? Because I mean, even for Ibrahim, I'm sure opening a studio and then it turned into a whole other thing. I'm sure there were phases where like, oh, okay, we're growing, where are we going? So the most difficult challenges is the fact that for me it's finding the people to connect with, to put that vision together and push it forward. I tend to find myself thinking on my own too much and trying to solve all the problems on my own, which for me is a great burden because some of the problems are not really constructive problems. They're just problems. And so in that case, there's a lot of time wasting and the little delays that turn into endless delays because of that. So people for me have been a difficulty. We've constantly worked with different people because I'm still trying to find the right fit. We do have those that have long-term relationship with, and there's nothing to complain about. And there's been beautiful relationships actually that have come out of everything we've done. But in the inside, it's very difficult to find. I just say maybe I have high standards. I'm very annoying. And I'm very precise, and I think that's what also sets us apart a bit. Nothing's haphazard in a way, and I think putting your 100% is very important, which here we have a very hard time doing. We are very relaxed. Everything is it's okay, and I don't like that. So trying to push always the limits and keep it ahead of the curve and keep going means you're literally breaking boundaries all the time, and you can't be weak and be doing that. You have to really be aggressive. And it's not like there's a challenge and a competition against anybody. It's just you are trying to outdo yourself every time. So that's one of the things I've had challenges with, definitely. In the space itself, it's not one that you can make a lot of money, not here. So for me, because I'm operating very much locally, literally all we've done has happened here on ground. We didn't do anything that we've exported per se. It's quite challenging because you don't get the support financially that you would if you were doing the same thing elsewhere. And people will tell me that all the time. Oh, if the shop was in New York, you'd be millionaires by now. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but the context isn't right. If I take this and put it there, it makes no sense, because then actually it's just another one of those millions which are there doing African whatever, or just whatever concept they'll label you with. Here it means something because you're actually starting something and you're actually building it, and people are actually getting involved from here, and so they're actually a part of it and they have their pride in what they're doing. So we're really laboring, I would say, with our environment to attain our goals, which can be very depressing and very, like, it really, you have to be very confident or stubborn or just like hard-headed, and know you want to do what you want to do, because Ghana can throw at you like slaps left and right. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Aside just the everyday life. And then you're doing things which, like, what are you going to do with all this? Like, what does it mean? Like, my family sometimes has a hard time understanding what I'm up to. I'm so busy all the time, but like, what are you actually doing? And I have to ask myself those questions too. I just know I have faith in what I'm doing and I enjoy it and I believe in it fully, and so that keeps me going. But yeah, I think we do need a bit more influx of people who want to come in and exchange, but maybe long term, because I feel like there's a lot of this very superficial exchanges, which they do add. I mean, it's your seasoning and salt and pepper in here, but you need the main meal, or the main ingredients, and I don't think we've really found our formula for that yet. So we're searching, we're working, figuring out.
Whenever they ask you what you should tell them you're building institutions that will last forever, even if they can't see it. Thank you, Stefania. So we have Poetry here now. Poetry, can you hear me now? Hi, Poetry. Hey, these my witches. I won't allow you. I won't allow you. Poetry, please. We'll try to get you back. Okay. All right. Okay, Poetry, are you
I
there
can
now?
hear. I
Perfect.
think you have to
Yay.
add me to the broadcast.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm
you're
here.
in. You're live.
Can you
Yeah.
hear
Okay.
me?
Perfect. Yes, I can hear you.
Can
Yay.
you hear
Okay,
me?
Poetry, thank you so much. There's so much I wanted to ask you, but I guess
Can
I'll
you hear
put it
me?
all in one question.
I'm
We can
here.
hear you clearly.
Yeah.
Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So yeah, I wanted to find out from you, what was the art landscape like for you when you were starting, and if you can tell us a little bit about your own work building institutions in
Yes,
this
I
landscape,
can hear you.
that would be
Yep.
great.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So there's a lag. We're just going to wait a second to get. There's quite a lag, so we'll wait a few seconds to get Poetry. Talking about institutions, these internet institutions, eh? Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll try to get Poetry back. I'm really sorry about that. So Ibrahim, I'm going to jump to you. What challenges have you faced? I mean, building institutions, with the challenges, with the people not necessarily being as 100% as you are, and people not understanding what you're doing, and also the successes, the beautiful relationships, and any other things that have happened. Please share.
Oh, well, for me, when I started my work as an artist, I was mostly collecting materials and objects from spaces for a long period. because I was also interested in the kind of deficits within our cultural institutions, because there are a lot of objects, archives, and materials out there which need to be documented, and also which need to be looked at closely, both as artistic materials and also just as objects in their own right. But there hasn't been much effort that has been put into it. So for me, the memory within objects was my starting point, and the fact that when you go into like communities, there are people who are already like, for a long time, our mothers and grandmothers were collecting like cloth, or collecting certain types of fabrics or cabinets for showing maybe their wealth in term of like cloth or china ware or whatever they had. So I was always very much interested in this, to connect it to all the other histories we have, railways, whatever we have. So it's connected to the institution, both in Kumasi in terms of the art school, and in my studio in Accra, and people I've worked with. They, I would I've never really considered many of those challenge, because for us, they coming from Kumasi, the stress was always on the idea of building community, and you realize that most of what we are trying to do, it's not as if there is a blueprint for it. We are trying to understand as we go. So there are younger artists, or for instance, when you come to SCCA, the artistic director of SCCA is my colleague from undergrad, Selam Kujin. He's currently doing his PhD. We have Esinam Damali, who's also an artist who completed from there. She works with us in the position of an administrator. We have Enes Sakite, who did his national service with us, but he helps us with the archiving, documentations, and other things, and also teaching the kids the drone workshops and all the other things. You have Mashoud, who also works as a manager. You have the assemblyman, who is the caretaker, who also is very much interested in what we do. He doesn't have any, like, he's, of course, he's just like, he has a basic educational training, um but he is very much in love with, he's seen the institution from the foundation, because he lived in the village where Red Clay was built. So he loves the idea, and he is invested his whole life into it. His children has grown around the institution. When people come to the institution, he takes them around and he shows them. He even, when even we have school kids coming there, he takes them around, and then he talks to them about some of the ideas we've been talking about, but in Dagbani. And it becomes really powerful and interesting in the case that you have, let's say, in a rural community, like people who have a sense of belief in something, and you suddenly have introduced an idea to the place, and they've taken this idea and then they've really held on to it, and then they've interpreted it even with their own, in their own history and culture and things like that. So for me, and together with many all the other people that we work with and the communities, like for instance, for a long time, people said, "Oh, but if you build a space like that in Tamale, you wouldn't get an audience because people don't understand art." But no one really, in as much as, even for those of us who have done art maybe to a PhD level, and we're still struggling to understand what it is. So the best way is to see how we can build a strong community around the things that we do, and see how that can carry forth the ideas that we want to. Because art sometimes isn't necessarily what exists, but art can mostly be a revelation. So it can be an attitude that allows us to rethink about the world and culture and other things. So that's why for us, we are building new spaces, but at the same time, we're also interested in old spaces. So for instance, buying old buildings, which the state would ordinarily tear down. We have no idea how these things work, but we will collaborate, let's say, with engineers or construction workers, and we will do interventions, and then we'll revive and bring the space back to life. So for me, in that sense, I think it's very successful. It would have been a different situation if you of course, the government is unsupportive and doesn't help in any of these things, but that's where I think that we really have to find ways in which we can somehow do work, no matter how difficult it is, to evolve another generation who one day, when they occupy these positions of power, maybe they might be the ones to influence the changes that we need. But currently, with the current system that we have, it's very difficult to get any sense of hope from it. So for me, I don't even go there to begin with. I'm completely hopeless when it comes to the states as an institution. But when it comes to individual people, I think we can only be patient with them and then work together and all learn together and be able to create something. Yeah, so that's my take on it in a way.
Thank you very, very much for that. And I want to piggyback off what you mentioned on community to throw my next question. And Stefania, that goes to you to start. How important or how crucial would you say community is to your work? And also, how important is community to building institutions?
I mean, with what we've done, I think it's mostly entirely through community. I wouldn't say we did anything on our own, you know. It had a lot to do with people wanting to try things out, and we were saying, yeah, come and do it here. So if there was no one coming around to say we want to do something, there would be nothing to talk about right now, quite simply. So it's really about people wanting to do stuff, and for us, we are the enablers. So community is all at the center of what we do. Initially, it was us designing stuff and just making commentary on Ghana in a fun way and putting on a t-shirt, which is what caught people's attention. But then that also caught attention of people who were doing their own products, and they now had to put it somewhere and sell, because not everybody can open a store and have an outlet for their goods. It didn't happen even online, mostly because we had such difficulties sending things abroad or even getting our payments here for the longest time. So no one could even go online to sell their products. And that took forever to sort out. So what was happening with those who are here? What do they do? How do they sell? Where do they go? Where do they put their stuff? I was even one who took my products to Free, who took them to Wild Gecko, to what was it called? Where the Silverbird. They used to have a shop. Remember when they opened the mall in the beginning? There was a bookstore and music store. So we had our t-shirts there. But even for me, I was realizing that nobody understands branding. So let me just take all my stuff back. Because there were so many episodes of things happening that made me understand that no, branding is not in the menu here. So you realize that slowly people were having to evolve their thoughts on how they even look at goods and products from Ghana, because by default initially it was like, oh, that's low quality, bad finish, don't even bother. And I thought it was just sad, because coming from Italy, that's like the complete opposite. They have such pride in who they are, on their history, the fact that they're designers, they're luxury designers, there are all kinds of things going on there, and they're so proud of it. And I'm coming from that place, and I'm also coming from this place where they literally say this is trash if it's from here. And I couldn't understand how, there was such this huge gap between the two. So getting involved now in changing mindsets, it's people. You're dealing with community. You're dealing with getting the message out. You're dealing with everyone coming on board and saying their own. And that's what kind of built the momentum with what we're doing, because we went from one brand to 3 the next years, then all the way up to like 300 right now, which have even now been extended to incorporate through the Young Africa Works MasterCard Foundation and Ghana Enterprise Agencies. We're also now extending to an institutional support for little enterprises which are starting up and need an outlet for their products. So something that we were doing as a cool fad, something that we'll play around with, has now become a real space in which people who produce in Ghana can actually bring and showcase their products in. And this again is through knowing and getting yourself out there, and people saying things about you and showing them what you can do. Without community, I don't think anything can go on. I mean, literally. Yeah, there's been big fights and all that. I mean, we have all these things in communities. I look at it as a household. Everything happens in a household. There's laughter, there's joy, there's sadness, there's all of that. And our community in Ghana it's very small. We all know each other. It's quite intimate. And I think we all have personal hates and grudges and friends and lifelong, commitments to each other that everyone can talk about. So being so small also is very important that we don't mess ourselves over, because we tend to see that a lot in our community, where if I don't get, you also don't get. And I think that attitude is very hurtful. It doesn't help us. It doesn't help anybody in the long run. And there's a lot of conversations in that department that need to be had, I think. on how we address things as a group. Is there a group? Where is it? Is there a head to anything? So these kind of questions also, again, they need to be asked. And I think we do really need some bodies that, I don't know, we don't have a design institution, or, everything needs to be slowly categorized. That's how I'm seeing it. And I think as we're evolving, we're developing our own interests and we're exploring more. So we will get to the point where we'll start to identify things. I think for now it's very much free flowing, and people are kind of still in the experimental phase. And look at this situation where now, I mean, the whole world is different. We're all trying to figure out what's actually life at the moment. And I think that's going to bring out a whole bunch of new evolutions and interpretations of how we're supposed to be living. So they're all conversations that will definitely affect everything that goes on a community level, because nowadays, like, we have so many online talks. It's so easy to connect with people around the world. The community that is Ghanaian, for me, even was stronger outside than the one that was in Ghana, because what we were doing was appealing more to someone who's been abroad for a few years and is missing home than someone who's here already, and it's like, yeah, it's just all taken for granted in a way. So my community, funny enough, was stronger outside of Ghana, and then because of that, those in Ghana now had reason to support, which was like the reverse in many cases. But we see that happening a lot. And I mean, I just take it as it is. We can't really complain too much. And I just feel like it's good to just give our 2 cents on things and make sure that we do our part. Literally, we just always do our part. Ibrahim, it's now you and me.
So what happened? The Empire Strikes Back. The internet.
The Empire Strikes Back. They take it out too, man.
Yes.
Oh man.
If you talk badly about the Ghana internet, it will come back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so sorry about that. Charlie, today, dear, the demons won't allow them.
We are dealing with it.
All right, but thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm going to throw the question to you too now, Ibrahim. On community, you already touched on it, but if you can talk about the importance of community in building your institution. I think it was great how you spoke about the assemblyman as a caretaker, being the one to show people around. If you can expand a little bit, thank you.
Yeah, for us, it's important because we are trying to somehow find comrades and other people in spirit who can actually support the kind of work and ideas that we have. And sometimes those people might not necessarily all be from your immediate environment. So the context of community is much wider. So for instance, you might have someone in Tokyo who actually is willing to support an idea or a project that you're doing in a certain way, whereas in Ghana, you wouldn't be able to find. So for instance, I give you an example. Like last year, one of the deputy ministers for arts and culture, like I was trying, his constituency was literally just the constituency after where Red Clay was. And I was trying to get his attention for us to have a conversation around what the institution meant and how we could apply it. But it never got anywhere. He was not interested. Whereas maybe you have people coming in all the way from Kumasi and Accra or out of the country who are willing to somehow engage in these ideas and to find ways in which we can move it forward. So for me, it's more or less finding people who have the right spirit and the right mentality. Sometimes you want to do something, and there are people who, when you discuss those ideas with, they actually believe in those ideas. They should believe in those ideas far more than even you yourself as an artist or as a person. I have an uncle who helps me with a lot of things. His name is Uncle Lisa. And when we started this project with collecting the airplanes from Accra and sending them to Tamale for the studio projects and things like that, he was the one who led the charge with regards to like talking to like the airport force officials and like organizing the cranes, like the trucks that would transport it and blah blah blah. So, and there were times when I said, nah, this thing, it's not going to work. It's not going to go anywhere. But he would say that it will happen. And true, it will happen. So sometimes you have an idea, but it gets to a point where like, Charlie, this thing there, what trouble have I gone to carry upon myself? So the thing is about it's about also building that community of people around you who actually are willing to somehow push this thing beyond what it is. And you tomorrow you might not be around, but at least once there is a strong community base around the ideas that you're working with, it means that in the future to come, this whatever you're working on is going to live and is going to be much bigger. And the community could also honestly be within the idea of our audiences, like school kids or people that you somehow engage with within the community and all that. There are people who grew up around these ideas, and in the future I believe that they will carry the flag of whatever there is. Where did Akosia go?
Akosia is here. Thank you very much for sharing that. A question came in. I'm trying to get it back. As soon as I get it back, I'll throw that question to you. But I wanted to ask to follow up with all you shared on what you thought about, the global movements, the influence of Pan-African or decolonial or anti-racist movements, even global human rights movements, and how it influences art and cultural institutions in Ghana, considering, for instance, what's happening currently in this time with anti-LGBT hate bill that's in Parliament, and the global uproar being sparked by movements all around, and how that aids, how does that influence arts and cultural institutions here? Thank you. Stefania, maybe you can go now.
I mean, we as an internationally, well, no, not internationally, as like our community is also international. I wanted to put it that way, because we're online. Okay, so issues that happen around the world tend to affect us now. When before you're in your little bubble, you're in your country, you might read on the newspaper or TV, but it wasn't so in your face. And if you're interested, you'll deal with those issues. Now it's literally 24 hours a day. You're hearing it and it's on your mind. It doesn't matter what issue it is. You're going to be affected by it and you're going to have it come at you. The only way is like tune out and then you don't see or hear anything. So I think it's definitely going to affect everything we do here. I mean, it has changed the landscape in many ways because of this. There's a lot of things that were not our concern initially and which are very much our concern now. And this is, again, got to do a lot with the fact that it's a global world we're living in at the moment. And the issues that affect one country can easily, ride over the border and just be your problem as well. Also, because I think we do suffer a lot of the same things everywhere at the end of the day. And the problems are really one and the same in every country. So it's very easy to identify and experience, the emotions behind whatever it is. And that's definitely going to be expressed then, because art, again, is expression in whatever form it's presented. It's going to be regurgitated, like as Ibrahim was saying, maybe try painting it prettier or make it uglier. But either way, you're going to say something about it and express it. And it's come out in the music, it's come out in our writing, it's come out in our visual arts, it's come out in all forms of art that we have. Even our movies. We don't even talk about that as an art form too much, but I think the African movie and cinema scope needs to be given some attention because, I mean, as a child, I couldn't comprehend them very much. Our Ghana Gollywood movies, I just found them to be very chaotic. But that alone is like something that needs to be looked at. We've had a transition also in our cinema from very proper, very correctly done cinema from our early independence days when our actors were very well schooled and they had like a very much different background from the actors of today, where really anyone can pick up a camera and put a film together. So there's this like whole do-it-yourself attitude in a lot of things as well, which I see happening because people literally have the tools to get the information for themselves now. You don't have to wait on a professor or some mentor or you can literally go look and choose who you want to learn from because the internet is that vast. And because of that, everyone's being influenced literally by everything they want to be influenced by. And it's very real. You can literally see it in what's being produced now.
Thank you. There's this question that's coming, and I want to throw this to you, Ibrahim. So it goes like this. Can you talk about some of the conflicts of building community abroad, but making art about home? That is more consumed by foreigners than by people from home. Was there a point where you identified that you needed to be abroad versus at home, or vice versa? You're you're on mute. Ibrahim, you're
Sorry.
on mute. Yeah.
For me, I've always wanted to make art, and then the art that I make, it might start from a local perspective with an idea or a seed which is local with a historical background, but I am always looking at the universal ideas, like implications of some of these ideas. Of course, when I make work as an artist, of course, there I work with galleries and also museums around the world. These works or ideas are exported, which are shown in these exhibitions, which go into a much larger global context of art to begin with. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter when you produce art as a Ghanaian, and if it's consumed outside, there's no problem with it, or vice versa, whatever it is. But it's always the context, and also like when you're looking at it in relation to the local or the global in any context. I For one person, I've always felt that it's also important for us to be able to produce work to be consumed locally. So that's why, like in making a lot of the works, I deliberately make them with materials that people are familiar with. So there's one of the questions where someone is talking about the fact that I think it was specifically directed to me about the fact that there is no audience to art. People don't understand. So Ibrahim, how do you engage local audiences to connect to art? And it's that thing, because you can't always assume that people that art is very, it's because of the assumption of art, what art had always been historically. Because if you're looking at art from, let's say, a modernist perspective, and then maybe you think that people don't understand art because maybe enough people don't go to galleries and things like that, but that is not totally true. When, as I was saying in the beginning, like our mothers and grandparents used to collect all kinds of materials, furniture, cloth. We go into their room, the kind of carpet, wallpaper, even the clothes that they wore, the fashion trend, like the kind of cuts that were in the clothes. All these things are very important, and art is very broad in terms of how people, the attitude that people bring into it. So for us, if you're trying, we've always thought that we are in crisis because in terms of cultural institutions, the state hasn't done much to invest into it. Because look at the National Museum, the Science and Technology Museum. They've been abandoned since Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown, and many other institutions alike. So at least if we want to be able to like go back to the question of like art and experience, we also have to look at it on an institutional level. So for instance, now you can say that people already have a sense of understanding about art, but just that it's not so prevalent as it should be. So why can't we find ways in which we can open up the context of institutions that can allow people to experience these things a lot more openly, more democratically, and also so that it's more or less it's dependent on us. We somehow have to, we don't have to assume that people don't understand. We have to assume that it is there, but we need to be able to like recontextualize, and we need to follow it slowly, and we need to add more to it. We need to challenge ourselves, and then people gradually will become more and more interested in it, and then it will open up maybe another thing.
Thank you very, very much for that. So apparently we've got just 5 minutes left, but we have a question for Poetra, which I want to throw to you. Actually, it's directed at you, Stefania. Thank you, Poetra, for sending the question. It's so annoying that you couldn't be here. So it goes like this, that beyond local being a concept store, it provided a physical space for all the arts to convene, visual, literary, performance, and that has actually fostered inspiration. And Stefania, was this intentional? Maybe answer this question also as your conclusion to our conversation on arts and its change in the community.
Yeah. It wasn't intentional. I won't even lie about that. It was very much just being open to the possibilities, and not turning anyone away. Really, people would show up with all kinds of ideas, and we'd just be like, let's try and make it happen, literally. And I think it was just a very positive attitude and full of hope and possibility that we just carried through with most of the things we did. We did most of it with no funding. We literally just had to try and scrape things together half the time. Whoever is showing up is broke. We also broke. We're just trying to make it happen. And yeah, it was more about believing in what we wanted to create. Collaboration is definitely, I think, a byproduct because of the way it came about. It was already set up like it was supposed to be in that context. But I think beyond that, really, is just the fact that we didn't set ourselves any limits as to what we could achieve, and that kind of trickled down to others, because once we started to show people how easy it could actually be to do some things, it allowed others to then have faith and hope that they could also pull it off as well. And then those who came in and did it as like a complete commercial activity already had a blueprint that they could see was working and had been tried and tested in a very organic manner. So it's kind of like we just like set the tone, allowed it to grow, and then let it take its life on its own, and just like kind of proceed with it. So I would say yeah, it's very organic. I mean, everything I think that's happened in Ghana in the past few years has been quite organic on every front, and now is the time when we should literally sit back and look at what's happened and try and put some dots on the I's and some cross some T's, pretty much, because that's the next step for me. Ibrahim, do you want to add something? Me, I'm done.
I guess yeah, you're right. I guess it's a really good time to be in. It's a really good time to live in, and it's a time actually to foster new collaborations and also to be a lot more experimental. I guess things are opening up, and for some reason, sometimes I see that it's people are still afraid, and people can still be quite conservative in the way that they approach forms and also how they create their work for global experiences and all that. And I think that if anything, the fact that we're a very young population, and also we are very much interested in culture, means that we should be willing to take more risk and try things that would open up the art scene for the best it can be. We don't necessarily need to know what it's going to be. I think that's always the thing. People are so afraid. They're like, "Oh, what if you invest so much into it, and then what?" But you don't need to know. Just do it, because there are so many people who are dependent on us. I was telling someone the other day, the moment you wake up in the morning, and then you don't have to think about the fact that you have to think about what you eat, and that is sorted. Like you don't have to think about what you are going to eat the rest of the year. It means that you have a certain sense of responsibility on your hands. So that should urge you to even think about the way you place yourself in the community around you. So that's it.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask what you thought your future hopes for the scene would look like for Ghana and Africa, but I think you've both wrapped it up very, very, very nicely in your final responses. And on this note, we are done. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Thank you very much for giving us your knowledge. I'm going to hand it over.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ibrahim, Stefania, for your illuminating thoughts. Thank you, Akosia, for moderating. It's unfortunate that we were not able to have Poetra on, but as we said, this is based on the podcast episode about Poetra, and so you can hear all of her thoughts about art and institution in Ghana. It's available on any streaming platform that you use, and so yeah, check it out there. Poetra does so much cool stuff in Ghana with literature and poetry and music and everything. And we'll be sharing links to the podcast in the chat. We'll also share links to all of these panelists and the work they do. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.